Come, sit down. This is the story I've been afraid to tell. Not because I don't know it, I know it too well. But because every time I tell it, something inside me breaks. Every single time. This is not a story of miracles. Not a story of healing. Not a story of wine or bread or walking on water. This is the story of a man dying. But not just any man. And not just any death. This is the story of the day the sky went dark. The day the earth shook. The day God's Son hung between heaven and earth on two pieces of wood, bleeding, suffocating, and still loving. The cross. Father, forgive them. It started the night before. Gethsemane. The Garden of Olives. A place Jesus had gone to many times before to pray, to be alone, to talk to his Father. But this night was different. This night the air was heavier. The shadows were darker. The silence was louder. Jesus knew what was coming. He knew it the way you know a storm is coming before you see the clouds. He felt it in his bones, in his blood, in every fiber of his being. He had known since the beginning, really. Since the Jordan River, since the wilderness, since the first miracle. Every step he had taken for 3 years had been leading to this night. To this garden. To this hour. He brought Peter, James, and John with him, his closest three. The inner circle. The ones who had seen the transfiguration, who had been with him on the mountaintop when his face shone like the sun. He wanted them near. And then he said something that should stop every heart that hears it. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. The Son of God said he was dying from sorrow. Not from the nails, those would come later. Not from the whip, that would come later too. From sorrow. From the weight of what was about to happen. From seeing it all laid out before him like a road leading into absolute darkness. He walked a little further. Fell to the ground. Not knelt, fell. His face in the dirt. And he prayed. Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me. This cup. Do you know what was in that cup? Not wine. Not water. Every sin ever committed. Every murder, every lie, every betrayal, every cruelty, every act of violence, every abuse, every injustice that had ever been done or ever would be done, all of it was in that cup. And he was about to drink it. He was about to take the darkness of all humanity into himself. And for the first time, perhaps the only time, he asked if there was another way. Father, if it is possible. But then, and this is what separates Jesus from every other human who has ever lived, he finished the prayer, yet not my will, but yours be done. Not my will. Yours. Luke tells us that his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Medical science has a name for this: hematidrosis. It happens under extreme stress, when capillaries burst and blood seeps through the sweat glands. It is exceedingly rare. It happens when the human body is pushed to the very edge of what it can endure. Jesus was at that edge. And his three closest friends, they were sleeping. He came back to them 3 times, and 3 times he found them asleep. Not because they didn't care, because they were exhausted from grief. But imagine the loneliness. The loneliest man in the history of the world, on the loneliest night in the history of the world, and even his best friends couldn't stay awake for 1 hour. Then the torches came. Through the olive trees, flickering orange lights. The sound of armor. The clink of swords. And leading them all, Judas. Judas. One of the 12. A man who had eaten with Jesus, traveled with Jesus, laughed with Jesus, listened to Jesus teach, watched Jesus heal. 3 years of shared life. And now he was leading soldiers to arrest him. And the signal: a kiss. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. A kiss. The most intimate gesture of friendship and love, turned into the instrument of betrayal. Judas walked up to Jesus, said Rabbi, and kissed him. And Jesus looked at him and said, and these words haunt me, friend, do what you came to do. Friend. He called him friend. In that moment, knowing what the kiss meant, knowing what would follow, he didn't say traitor. He didn't say how dare you. He said friend. Because Jesus never stopped loving. Not even Judas. Not even then. The soldiers grabbed him. Peter drew his sword and cut off a soldier's ear. And Jesus even now, even in this moment, healed the ear. His last act of healing. His last miracle before the cross. And it was for a man who had come to arrest him. They took him away. What followed was a mockery of justice. Trial after trial. Annas, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, Pontius Pilate, Herod. Back to Pilate. Shuffled from court to court like a piece of evidence no one wanted to deal with. False witnesses. Contradicting testimonies. Questions designed not to find truth but to find guilt. And through all of it, Jesus was largely silent. Isaiah had prophesied this 700 years earlier, like a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Pilate couldn't find a crime. He knew Jesus was innocent. His own wife sent him a message, "Have nothing to do with this righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." But the crowd was screaming. The religious leaders were insisting. And Pilate was a politician before he was a judge. He offered them a choice. It was a custom: release one prisoner during Passover. Jesus or Barabbas. Jesus the healer, the teacher, the man who turned water into wine and raised the dead, or Barabbas, a murderer and insurrectionist. Barabbas. The crowd screamed, "Give us Barabbas!" And what should they do with Jesus? Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate washed his hands. Literally. He took a basin of water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said, as if water could wash away that guilt. As if a gesture could erase what he was about to allow. Then came the scourging. Roman scourging was not a simple whipping. The instrument was called a flagrum, a short whip with multiple leather thongs, each embedded with pieces of bone and metal. When it struck flesh, it didn't just bruise, it tore. It ripped. It shredded. The prisoner would be stripped naked and tied to a post, bent over, back exposed. And the soldiers would take turns. Strike after strike after strike. The skin would split open first. Then the muscle beneath. In severe cases, the rib cage would become visible. Internal organs could be exposed. Many prisoners died from scourging alone. They never made it to the cross. Jesus survived. Barely. His back was a ruin. Strips of flesh hanging loose. Blood pouring down his legs, pooling at his feet. He could barely stand. His vision was blurring. Shock was setting in, that cold, trembling, disconnected feeling when the body begins to shut down. But the soldiers weren't finished. They dressed him in a purple robe mocking royalty. They wove a crown from thorns, not the small thorns you see on roses, but the long, hard, needle-sharp thorns of the ziziphus plant, some of them 2 inches long, and they pressed it into his scalp. The scalp is one of the most blood-rich areas of the body. Blood poured down his face, into his eyes, mixing with the sweat and dirt. They put a reed in his hand, a mock scepter. And they knelt before him in mockery. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spat on him. They took the reed and struck him on the head, driving the thorns deeper. Picture this. The man who calmed storms. The man who raised the dead. The man who could have called down legions of angels with a single word. Standing there. Bleeding. Being spat on. Being mocked by soldiers who didn't know, couldn't possibly know who they were hitting. And he let them. He let them. Then came the walk. The Via Dolorosa. The way of suffering. From Pilate's court to Golgotha, the place of the skull. Roughly 600 meters. Not far, you might think. A 10-minute walk on a normal day. But Jesus was carrying a cross. Not the entire cross, most likely the horizontal beam, the patibulum. It weighed somewhere between 30 and 50 kilograms. And it was placed on the shoulders of a man who had been awake all night, beaten, scourged to within inches of his life, crowned with thorns, and hadn't eaten or drunk anything. He walked through the streets of Jerusalem. The same streets where, just 5 days earlier, crowds had laid palm branches and shouted Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The same streets. Some of the same people. Now shouting for his death. He stumbled. Of course he stumbled. His body was failing. His legs couldn't support both his weight and the weight of the beam. He fell. Face down in the dirt. The wood pressing into his shredded back. Blood smearing the stones. The soldiers grabbed a man from the crowd, Simon of Cyrene. A bystander. A man who had come to Jerusalem for the Passover, probably just wanting to buy some supplies, and suddenly found a Roman soldier pointing at him. You carry that beam. Simon didn't choose this. He was forced into it. But he picked up the cross and walked behind Jesus. And I always wonder what Simon felt in that moment. When the weight of the wood settled onto his shoulders. When he looked at the man walking ahead of him, barely alive, still moving forward. What did he understand? What did he feel? Did he know he was carrying the instrument that would kill God's Son? Women were weeping along the road. Wailing, crying, tearing their hair. And Jesus, broken, bleeding, barely breathing, stopped. Turned to them. And spoke, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." Even now. Even dragging himself toward his own execution. He was thinking about others. He was warning them about what was coming, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the horrors their children would face. In his worst moment, he was caring for their future. Golgotha. The place of the skull. A rocky outcrop outside the city walls. The Romans chose it deliberately elevated, visible from the road. Crucifixions were public spectacles. They were meant to be seen. Meant to terrify. Meant to send a message: this is what happens when you challenge Rome. They laid him down. On the wood. His shredded back pressing against the rough surface of the beam. Every splinter digging into open wounds. He was looking up at the sky, that blue Jerusalem sky that he had created, that he had painted into existence before the world began. And then the nails. Roman crucifixion nails were not small. They were iron spikes, roughly 15 centimeters long, 7 millimeters thick. Square-shaped. Designed not to slip out. A soldier took Jesus's right hand. Stretched the arm along the beam. Positioned the nail against the wrist, not the palm, the wrist, between the radius and ulna bones, because a nail through the palm would tear through under the body's weight. The wrist is where it holds. And the soldier raised the hammer. Think about this sound. Close your eyes and hear it. Metal striking metal. But not just metal, metal driving through flesh, through tendon, through nerve, into wood. The sound echoed off the rocks. Once. Twice. 3 times. 4 times. Until the nail was flush and the hand was pinned. Jesus screamed. He must have. The median nerve runs directly through the wrist. It's one of the most pain-sensitive areas in the human body. The nail would have crushed it, sending bolts of fire up the entire arm, into the shoulder, into the spine. A pain so intense it has its own medical term: excruciating. The word literally comes from the Latin ex crucis, from the cross. We invented a word for this kind of pain because no other word was sufficient. Then the left hand. The same sound. The same fire. The same scream. Then the feet. Both placed on a small wooden support, one on top of the other. Another nail driven through both, into the vertical beam. And then they raised him up. The cross was lifted with Jesus nailed to it and dropped into a hole in the ground. The impact jarred his entire body. Every nail shifted. Every wound tore wider. His arms bore the full weight of his body, pulling the shoulders from their sockets. Breathing became a battle to inhale. He had to push up on the nail through his feet, scraping his shredded back against the wood, just to expand his chest enough for one breath. Then he would sag down again. And the cycle would repeat. Push up to breathe. Sag down. Push up. Sag down. Every breath was an act of agony. Every heartbeat pumped blood out of the wounds. Flies gathered. The sun beat down. This was crucifixion. This was how Rome killed. Not quickly. Slowly. A person could hang on a cross for days. The cause of death was usually asphyxiation. Eventually the body could no longer push up to breathe. Or cardiac arrest. Or hypovolemic shock from blood loss. Or all three. They hung a sign above his head. Pilate had ordered it written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Latin, Greek, so everyone could read it: Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The religious leaders protested. Don't write King of the Jews. Write that he claimed to be King of the Jews. And Pilate, for the only time in this entire story, showed a backbone. What I have written, I have written. 2 criminals were crucified beside him. One on the left, one on the right. 3 crosses on a hill. 3 men dying. And at the foot of the cross, soldiers were gambling. Throwing dice for his clothes. His seamless robe, the one his mother may have woven for him. They didn't want to tear it, so they cast lots. Scripture being fulfilled in the most casual, careless way imaginable. Men playing games while God died above them. And now, the words. Jesus spoke 7 times from the cross. 7 last statements. And each one is a universe. The first words he spoke, the very first words, while the nails were still fresh, while the blood was still pouring, while the soldiers who had just hammered iron through his flesh were sitting below him throwing dice, were these: Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Forgive them. Forgive them. Not punish them. Not destroy them. Not Father, look what they've done to me. Not Father, send the angels, and this now. Forgive them. The soldiers who scourged him, forgive them. The crowd that screamed crucify him, forgive them. Pilate who washed his hands, forgive him. The Pharisees who plotted, forgive them. Judas who kissed him, forgive him. Peter who denied him, forgive him. Everyone. All of them. In the moment of his greatest agony, his first thought was not of himself. His first words were a prayer for the people who were killing him. They do not know what they are doing. He gave them the most generous excuse possible. They don't know. They're ignorant. They think they're executing a criminal, a blasphemer, a troublemaker. They don't know they're killing the author of life. They don't know these nails are being driven into the hands that shaped the mountains and filled the oceans. They don't know. And because they don't know, forgive them. This is what love looks like at its absolute limit. This is love with nothing left, no comfort, no dignity, no hope of rescue, and still choosing to love. Still choosing forgiveness. Still choosing mercy over justice. The crowd mocked him. He saved others, but he can't save himself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. He trusts in God, let God rescue him. Every word a knife. Every taunt a nail of its own kind. Because here's what they didn't understand: he could have come down at any moment. One word to the Father and 12 legions of angels would have descended. One thought, one decision, and the nails would have melded, the wood would have splintered, and every soldier, every mocker, every accuser would have fallen on their face in terror. He could have. But he didn't. Because if he came down, you and I would be lost forever. He stayed on the cross not because he couldn't come down, but because he wouldn't. Because the cup had to be drunk. Because the price had to be paid. Because love demanded it. And then the thief. 2 criminals beside him. One joined the mocking, Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. Dying, and still full of bitterness. But the other one looked at Jesus. Really looked. Through the blood and the sweat and the agony. And he saw something the Pharisees couldn't see, something the soldiers couldn't see, something the crowd couldn't see. He saw a king. He turned to the first criminal and said, "Don't you fear God? We're getting what we deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he turned to Jesus. A dying criminal talking to a dying Savior. Two men hanging side by side, both suffocating, both bleeding, both hours from death. And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Remember me. Not save me. Not heal me. Not take me down. Just remember me. When you get to wherever you're going, when you sit on whatever throne awaits you, just, don't forget I was here. Don't forget I existed. Remember me." It was the smallest, most humble request imaginable. A man who knew he deserved his punishment, asking only to be remembered. And Jesus answered, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Today. Not tomorrow. Not after you've served your sentence. Not after you've done enough good deeds to earn it. Not after you've been purified and tested and proven worthy. Today. No conditions. No prerequisites. No performance review. A criminal, a thief, a man who had probably done terrible things in his life, and with one sincere request, one moment of genuine faith, he received the greatest promise ever spoken: today, paradise, with me. This is the scandal of grace. This is what makes religious people uncomfortable. Because this thief didn't earn anything. He didn't fast for 40 days, didn't memorize scripture, didn't give to the poor, didn't attend temple every Sabbath. He just turned his head, looked at Jesus, and said, "Remember me." And Jesus said yes. Below the cross, a small group of people stood who weren't mocking, who weren't gambling, who weren't watching with curiosity or satisfaction. They were watching with broken hearts. Mary was there. His mother. The woman who had held him as a baby. Who had nursed him, sung to him, watched him take his first steps, heard his first words. The woman who had treasured everything in her heart: the angel's visit, the shepherd's story, Simeon's prophecy. Simeon's prophecy. A sword will pierce your own soul. This was the sword. She was watching her son die. Every mother's worst nightmare, played out in the most brutal, public, humiliating way imaginable. Her boy. Her firstborn. Naked, bleeding, gasping for air on a Roman cross. What goes through a mother's mind in that moment? Does she remember him as a baby? Does she see his tiny fingers wrapped around hers? Does she hear his laughter as a child? Does she remember the way he looked up at her when she read him the scriptures? She was standing close enough to hear him. Close enough to see the nails. Close enough to watch every agonizing breath. And Jesus saw her. Through the blood in his eyes, through the haze of pain, he saw his mother. And even now he thought of her. Even now, he took care of her. He looked at Mary. Then he looked at John, the disciple he loved, the only one of the 12 who hadn't run away. And he said, "Woman, behold your son." And to John, "Behold your mother." He was giving his mother a family. He was making sure she wouldn't be alone. In the middle of his own death, he was arranging someone's life. From that hour, John took Mary into his home. And then the darkness came. At noon, the brightest part of the day, the sky went dark. Not a cloud. Not an eclipse. The sun itself stopped shining. For 3 hours, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness covered the land. 3 hours of darkness. What happened in those 3 hours we don't fully know. But something cosmic was taking place. Something that went beyond the physical. The weight of every sin ever committed was being placed on Jesus' shoulders. The separation from God that humanity had earned was being experienced by God himself. And at the end of those 3 hours, Jesus cried out in a loud voice the loudest words he spoke from the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is the most terrifying sentence in all of Scripture. Because for the first time in all of eternity, from before time began, from before the stars were lit, the Son was separated from the Father. The Trinity was torn. The unbreakable bond was broken. Jesus, who had lived in perfect communion with the Father since before creation, was now utterly, completely, horrifyingly alone. He didn't say Father. He said my God. The intimacy was gone. The closeness was gone. He was experiencing what we deserve: total separation from God. Total darkness. Total abandonment. He experienced hell. So we wouldn't have to. The end came quickly after that. I thirst, he said. They lifted a sponge soaked in sour wine to his lips. His body was dehydrated, his blood nearly drained, his organs failing one by one. And then his final words. 2 statements that changed everything. It is finished. In Greek, tetelestai. It was a word used in commerce. When a debt was paid in full, the creditor would stamp the receipt with this word. Tetelestai. Paid in full. Done. Complete. The debt of humanity paid. The price of sin paid. The cup of wrath empty. The work he came to do finished. Not I am finished. It is finished. The mission. The purpose. The reason he left heaven and became human and walked among us and taught and healed and loved and suffered and bled. Finished. And then his very last breath. His very last words, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Father. The intimacy was back. The darkness had passed. The cup was empty. And he could say Father again. And he bowed his head. And he died. The earth shook. Literally. The ground trembled. Rocks split. The massive curtain in the temple, the veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place, the curtain that said God is in here and you cannot enter, that curtain tore. From top to bottom. Not from bottom to top, as if a man had done it. From top to bottom. As if God himself had reached down and ripped it open. The barrier between God and humanity was destroyed. The way was open. A Roman centurion, a hardened soldier who had probably overseen dozens of executions, stood at the foot of the cross, looked up at the dead body of Jesus, and said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." A pagan soldier. A man who worshipped Roman gods. A man who had just participated in the execution. And he was the first to say it. They took him down. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the very council that had condemned Jesus, went to Pilate and asked for the body. Nicodemus came too, the Pharisee who had once come to Jesus at night because he was afraid of what his colleagues would think. Now, in the hour when every other follower had fled, these 2 unlikely men stepped forward. They wrapped his body in linen. They laid him in a new tomb, carved from rock. They rolled a massive stone across the entrance. And they walked away. And the world was silent. Friday night. Saturday, the longest day in history. The disciples were hiding. Behind locked doors. Terrified. Shattered. Everything they had believed, everything they had given up their lives for, everything they had hoped dead. On a cross. In a tomb. Peter was somewhere, weeping. He had denied Jesus 3 times. 3 times, I don't know him. And then the rooster crowed. And Jesus had turned and looked at him. That look. What was in that look? Accusation? No. Disappointment? Maybe. But more than that, love. Even in that moment, being led to his death, Jesus looked at Peter with love. And Peter had crumbled. Mary Magdalene was somewhere, grieving. The woman from whom Jesus had cast out 7 demons. The woman who had been set free. The woman who had followed him from Galilee, who had supported his ministry, who had been there at the cross when almost everyone else had run. She had watched them put him in the ground. It was over. It was all over. Or so they thought. Because Sunday was coming. But that is another story. Here is what I want you to carry from this one. A man hung on a cross. He was in the worst pain a human body can experience. He was abandoned by his friends, mocked by his enemies, forsaken by his father. He had every reason, every right to curse the world, to call down fire, to let humanity burn in the hell it had chosen. And instead, he said, "Father, forgive them." That is who Jesus was. Not a philosopher. Not a teacher. Not a prophet. Not a good man with good ideas. A man who, while being murdered, prayed for his murderers. A man who, while suffocating on a cross, promised paradise to a thief. A man who, while dying, made sure his mother would be cared for. A man who drank the cup of human darkness to the last drop, and called it finished, and gave his spirit to the Father, and opened the way for every broken, lost, sinful, unworthy person to come home. That is the cross. And that is why, 2,000 years later, we're still sitting around this fire, telling this story. Because a love like that doesn't die. Not even on a cross. The fire has gone out. But the story hasn't ended. It never will. Shall I tell you what happened on Sunday?